Welcome to Who Cares, the podcast that embarks on a profound journey into the heart of empathy and indifference in our modern era. Each episode of Who Cares brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests from various industries and walks of life. But Who Cares goes beyond individual stories. We dive into the larger societal and psychological undercurrents that have led to a perceived decline in collective empathy. Who Cares isn't just a podcast. It's a powerful call to action for reigniting the spirit of empathy within each of us. Let's find the answer to Who Cares together. Welcome to Who Cares. Today on this episode of Who Cares, we are fortunate to have June Neely, who is a writer and producer based here in LA. She's worked in the television and film industry for over 10 years now on projects like They Cloned Tyrone, Queer Eye, and Love is Blind. Previously, she worked on a few amazing podcasts for a nonprofit, Crossing the Line, which was nominated for an Ambies and Webbies, as well as State of Women, which was nominated for the Ambies. She's also the EP host of Story for Good, the podcast where entertainment meets impact. So welcome. Very glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
And I would love to hear more about your history and how you came up in this and kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah. I knew I wanted to work in the film industry since like the 7th grade. I had been writing stories, and then an English teacher of mine had asked me about, like, are you interested in movies and like maybe writing for movies? And I was like, is that a job? Like, is that a thing people do? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, yes. So then I started writing scripts and taking video classes. Eventually, went to school for film, and then also studied theater arts. So I started my career mostly doing stage management for theater. And then moving into more film and TV later in life when I moved from Minnesota to Atlanta. I think I had just turned 30, and I was like, I need to take a leap. And I was like, I'm going to move to Atlanta. And everyone's like, okay. And then like 2 weeks later, I was gone. And everyone's like, you want to come over? And I was like, no, I'm in Atlanta now.
Wow.
Because I was like, I got to do it. I got to take that leap. And that's how I got my start. I worked, one of the first projects I worked on in Atlanta was Queer Eye. Mm-hmm. I did the first 2 seasons, and that was a great experience. I've worked in scripted and reality shows, film and TV, podcasts, like the works. So I was in Atlanta for about 5 years, and now I'm here in LA. I've been here for like a little over 3 years now.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Still kind of new for you.
Still, yeah, definitely still new.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but what I see the transition from what I've read is you really moved into a lot of projects where you can get involved with social impact.
Yeah. I always wanted to do work that mattered. Mm-hmm. But in the industry, a lot of times, because work is all project-based, you take, what you can. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started working at a nonprofit and I heard the term social impact entertainment. And I was like, what is that? Uh-huh. What does that do? And it's basically telling stories, but telling stories that create an impact, that either you have like an impact campaign with them, you then partner with another nonprofit who's already working on that, and you kind of uplift that nonprofit while also telling the story. So social impact, the story comes first, but then the impact is brought into that. And that's kind of what I learned working through that nonprofit. So like one of the first projects we worked on was called Crossing the Line. Uh-huh. It was a documentary style podcast where we went into clinics talking about reproductive rights. And so we were there right before Roe fell. We were there the day Roe fell. Wow. And then we were there catching the aftermath. And And it was such an amazing experience to like hear all these stories record, because I feel like sometimes with cameras and stuff, it can be a little bit intrusive, but because you have this small device and you're doing a podcast, people are more open to speaking and going, okay, so I can say these things and not necessarily my face, because you get, with those type of stories, you have to be sensitive.
It's very personal.
Yeah, it's very personal, and like, people can be prosecuted nowadays because of this. So we wanted to be sensitive to their stories, and then we created these campaigns that went along with it. So we created a whole website that uplifted all these nonprofits that pointed to all these different resources for anybody who's listening. It also told you how to get involved. So if there were any legislation that was happening in your state, you could search by state and find out what can I do, to kind of help this process. And that was a really great experience.
I was to say, it's being right on the front lines as it's happening. I mean, what was that like for you personally?
It was like when the Lido papers, when that leaked, we were like, wait, is this a thing? Is this happening? Like, because we were in the middle of like releasing episodes. So like we were releasing the episodes as if, Roe would still be here by the time we would be done. And when, the paper leaked and we're like, is it going to fall? So then we were like trying to figure out production, like, do we still record this? Like, do we still interview? So a lot of those episodes we had to kind of like revamp and just say like, hey, this was recorded prior to the fall of Roe. Just so they know that these statements were true then and they may not be true now. But the sentiments are still the same.
Yeah.
And so when we knew that it was going to fall, we were like, okay, we need to get as many producers as we can, like in these clinics that we're already talking to. We need to be there on the ground to hear the reactions, because some of those clinics, they essentially had to shut down that day.
Oh my gosh.
And there were people who were in the waiting room, waiting for procedures, and they had to walk out and say, we can't see you today, unfortunately, because everything has changed overnight. And then it was just following up the stories that we had already done, trying to get some semblance of a conclusion, even though you couldn't, because it was so chaotic. And I still feel like it's still that chaos is still kind of happening.
Much. Yeah. So, I mean, you must have been, in terms of mental health and seeing it happen in front of you, I mean, that must have been heavy to hold, holding these stories of people going through this and in an ever-changing atmosphere at the same time. And I mean, how did you manage that and still try to capture the story?
I think a lot of it is just having worked in production. So a lot of times when you work in production, like there's this term of hurry up and wait, where, you could be waiting around for something to happen. All of a sudden, like someone would say, we need this now. And you're like, we got to go and you got to push. And so it's that kind of feeling. And so it was still like understanding, what was happening and that it was huge, but also understanding from the production side, okay, we got to go. We got to push now. We got to try to figure out how to get this episode up as quickly as possible so that people can hear what's happening. Because I feel like there's a disconnect between what is happening in government versus what is happening on the ground and how it's affecting people immediately, because the second those protections left is the second that those people could no longer get the procedures they needed.
Yeah. So was there something you were noticing happening as that was all going on with the reactions and maybe the reactions to your podcast and putting that out there? Was there a lot of strong reactions?
There's definitely a lot of strong reactions. There's definitely a lot of strong reactions in the recording, because it's a lot of, like, you hear some of the physicians and like the patients, and it's just shock. And it's almost like they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's the next steps are. Like, how do I move forward? Because this just happened. Like, are we actually completely done? Because it was almost like waiting, like, is this actually happening? Or, or is there time to, like, make a transition. And it just depended on the state, unfortunately.
Right. Wow. So how is that evolving now? What are you seeing now from that?
It's interesting because we did the first season, and unfortunately there won't be a second season. We would have loved to have done a second one, but it's interesting seeing how many people are still listening to the show.
Wow.
And it was also great that we get all these activations through, like Apple ended up listing it as new and noteworthy.
Wow.
You know, we did the whole AMBs and we got nominated. So like, all these different things were able to like push it out and just have people listen to it. And then able to help these other organizations. So like we partnered with Plan C Pills, Planned Parenthood, Power to Decide, and we were able to like point to these organizations. So through our podcast and the work that we did, like they saw spikes in interest in them because the second it falls, everyone's immediately Googling like, what do I do? And so to have that information out there and to have those connections, I feel like made a small difference in that huge ripple.
Yeah, because you could provide the resources they needed to keep going, I imagine, because that's a huge shock. Yeah. So the podcast you're working on now?
Yes, it's called Story for Good. That kind of came out of my work in the nonprofit and learning about social impact entertainment, and I wanted to talk more about this because I didn't know what social impact entertainment was because I had been in the industry for years, and I didn't know that you could take story and use it essentially for good. Like obviously, there's stories that are good for you, stories that aren't, and even in my career when I worked on certain things, there's certain projects where I was like, oh, I don't know if I really want my name on this.
Yeah.
Like this show is kind of, I would never watch it kind of thing. But then there's other, shows that I've been on that I was like, wow, like this has been such a great experience, like seeing, people's life change or just seeing how my life changed through this project. Like I was like, I want more of that. And then so when I worked at a nonprofit and found out like, oh, this is a thing that people do, like they create stories that create impact. And I was like, well, I would love to talk more about that because I feel like more people need to know that that's an option. And so then I started just reaching out to people in my network, going to different conferences, like meeting people and saying like, I have this podcast. I think you'd be great on it. I'd love for you to come on. Because I talked to producers, directors, other nonprofits within the space who are working on it, just trying to like highlight this for other people so that they can see like, the stories that we make can be entertaining, but they can also help and point to things that, maybe may fall by the wayside.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you said create stories. Do they literally create stories? Or are these based on like biographical stories that people are working on?
It could be anything. Like it could be autobiographical or it could be it could just be any story. Like one of the people I interviewed, he did a Wall Street documentary about GameStop and that whole thing that happened. And like through that, he created a social impact campaign in which people who could watch the show could then learn about investing, learn about the issues that were ran into through this whole process that kind of like highlighted issues within, within Wall Street. And so I think he ended up doing an impact campaign with this other organization, and they created this, it was kind of like I can't remember what the term is, but essentially it was like a campaign because they wanted to change the rules in Wall Street because some of the reasons why this happened, why the whole AMC GameStop thing happened was because of the rules. And it's these rules that favor the rich, and it basically stopped down everyone who was like a regular person trying to get in.
Yeah.
And they wanted to highlight these rules, and just kind of like, and I'm not sure what ended up happening with that, but like they ended up meeting with some of the bigger people in, the FDIC and the SEC and all that stuff, like to kind of talk about this and say, hey, like this is a problem. Like you see that it was a problem.
Yeah.
And they, it was actually receptive. But of course, I don't know how the government works.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always a slow process, in changing rules. But it was really cool how he also had this other side where it was teaching people investment banking. It was teaching people like how this happened. So like you could tell the story about anything. Like it could be also as simple as Abbott Elementary with like teachers, and how Quinta Brunson, she takes these stories about these teachers, but she also like creates this impact behind it. So like she has a school bus she sends out that sends out school supplies to teachers.
Wow.
I think when they were going for the Emmys initially, that first year, they took that money, instead of spending it on campaigning, they sent that money to schools, to teachers, to help make a difference. So like it could be any story.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just how you decide to take that story and make things for the better.
Make it bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So out of all the podcasts you've done, is there anything that's really touched your heart or hit home for you?
I would say Crossing Line, just
that
one, just because it was one of the first.
Yeah.
And it was a really big project, and we just happened to be doing this in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah. It was perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So out of all the stories you've heard too, do you notice any patterns that run through them or any themes that are interesting?
Patterns or themes? Not really any patterns or themes, but I will say that a lot of this stuff it's run by the smaller people. So like when you have these impact campaigns, it's not the studio doing them. It's not the production company. It's the filmmaker.
Yeah.
So Tobias, who did the Gaming Wall Street, it was him who activated this. Like he was with HBO, but HBO was like, I don't know if we can necessarily get into this just because there's like politics with working with other corporation stuff. And he was like, but I want to do this. They said, if you want to do this, we will back you up.
Yeah.
So it was him who said that he wanted to do the activation. And so he followed through with that. Same thing, because I talked to Good Energy. Good Energy is a great organization that works, it's a nonprofit that focuses on climate storytelling. So a lot of times when they do climate storytelling, it's usually like the showrunners, the directors, they're the ones who reach out and say, I want to do this. So a lot of times it only happens because the people in the room who's saying, this is important to me and I think we should do it. And we can, and another thing that helps is that, so one of the people said that you shouldn't recreate the wheel, essentially, when it comes to these campaigns and trying to make a difference and telling these stories. Like, it's all about working with the system that's already there. So if you have a story that you want to tell, like say, for instance, you want to talk about, like Black kids who code. And you want to tell a story about, a Black coder. Well, there's organizations already that cater to, to helping Black kids learn how to code. So you wouldn't have to create your own organization. You have to create your own nonprofit. Instead, you go to the nonprofit and you say, hey, I already have the story. I've already written it. I want to write it, produce it, but I'd love to highlight this by working with your organization. And then you say to the organization, what can I do? What would be the best way to activate this? What do you need? And how can I bridge that with the project that I already have.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they go, oh, well, we have all these other ideas that we'd love to do. And you're like, great, let's work on this together. Because then you're not trying to figure everything out on your own, because then it ends up being too much work. But there's people already doing the work.
Right.
They already know what they need. They already know the best way they can do it. If you can merge those together and help them out, then that's the best way to move forward.
It's really cool. It's really terrific. So you were saying, though, that this is more accepted maybe by the smaller studios. Are you seeing it in the larger as well? Are you seeing it across the board in the industry coming through? Or do you think that's still kind of limited to, because I get the feeling that they're kind of limited to an algorithm or a certain way of producing and putting out film or media that way.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that kind of conflicts with social impact work.
I think it just depends on the filmmaker and whether or not they push it. So, for instance, Avatar, James Cameron's all about environmentalism.
Yeah.
And so when he did Avatar, it was to showcase the environment and talk about it. And so he does a lot of activations with the environment regarding that. And those are major blockbuster movies.
Right.
Same thing with Aquaman, like a huge storyline that was all about how humans are destroying the world and how Atlantis is trying to fix things. Black Panther was all about Afrofuturism and about, Black people in STEM.
Yeah.
And so when that movie came out, it highlighted that industry. So then, more Black people became interested in STEM. Mm-hmm. So it could be like blockbuster films. It could be big studio films, but it's usually the filmmaker or the writer behind it who's creating these opportunities, who's saying, like, I want to tell these stories because I think more people need to see this, because representation matters.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
If you talk about it, if you show it, more people become familiar with it, more people become interested in it. And any topic that you talk about, which is why you always have to be careful to make sure you talk about the project or whatever topic careful, which is why there's a bunch of organizations who say, if you want to talk about cancer, if you want to talk about, hard subjects, like, come to us. We'll give you the proper information and make sure you're giving the information correctly. So, like, a lot of times with, like, medical shows, like, Grey's Anatomy and stuff like that, they use people who are in those industries to give accurate information. Yeah. So they're also teaching the audience. Yeah. But they're also teaching the audience responsibly. Yeah. Yeah. Because it can become dangerous if you tell a story and you don't tell it the way that it should, and then it ends up triggering people instead of helping them.
Yeah, because it does have an impact on people. People take that as reality on some level. Yeah. And use it. Yeah, yeah. So what projects are you working on currently, and what do you have a goal or something you're looking forward to?
I'm still doing the podcast. I've done 11 episodes. Wow. Yeah, I released that podcast the same time I started a new job, which I don't recommend. It was very stressful.
I can imagine.
So I was like, okay, 11 episodes, break. Wow. But I'm gearing up to do more of those. So, like, just, doing the interviews and stuff. And then I'll be releasing more episodes probably next year. Mm-hmm. And then I'm also... Like, I'm a writer. I'm always writing. So, like, I'm currently working on a fiction podcast, like a short film, like a feature. Like, I always have something I'm writing. And then, I work full-time for Wondery, working as a video producer for them on a couple of shows, which has been a great experience. Really? Yeah. Because it's like a blend of both of my worlds of video and podcasting. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So is your goal to do a film at some point? Yes. Yeah. It is my goal to do a feature. I have an idea that it's been brewing for a while, and I'm like, okay, I need to write it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to tell more stories, like, from my own perspective of, growing up, like, as a middle middle-class Black kid in the middle of Minnesota. And I feel like that's something that's still missing, because I watch a lot of Black stories, but a lot of them, very few like kind of speak to the experience that I had growing up. And I was like, well, it's just another experience then. So then we add it to the, the zeitgeist, and it's another opportunity to see, Black people in a different way, in a different light. Like we said, representation matters. So, that's like the next big step.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's very exciting. Well, we deal a lot on our podcast about caring and about empathy in the world. And I think, I started this because I felt like people were kind of checked out, a lot after the pandemic. I go back and forth between, was it the pandemic? Is it the generation? Is it social media? What is it? And so we talk to people who have these passions and are living out their passions, which very much sounds like that's what you do. Just from that trip from, Minnesota to Atlanta must have been huge.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, you acted and you did it, and here you are. So you have incredible passion. And just curious, how do you cultivate that passion and keep that going? And what is your opinion about that for this generation?
I feel like there was a little bit of a breaking point during the pandemic, because I know I was in Atlanta at that time, and, being from Minnesota, it was the same time where George Floyd happened.
Yeah.
And that's actually when I had created my first podcast, just because I felt restless, and I was like, I want to do something. I want to say something, because my family's like, and friends are all talking to me about what's happening in Minneapolis, and I'm like, I know that area. I've been there. Like, I knew someone who had, contact previously with that cop, and knew just how awful he was. Wow. So I think a lot of that is just people. It's when something like hits the fan like that, like you feel the urge to do something. You feel the urge, like you have to care, and you don't know how to, though, at the same time. And I feel with a lot of social media, it's kind of this weird balance. Like, there's certain times where you see a lot of comments on posts, and you just be like, wow, people are awful and the things that they're saying or doing. But then there's other moments where, someone will post a video about a rescue, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad they're okay. Like, if you need anything, like, people are reaching out. Right. It's that common saying of, when something is happening, look for the helpers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's the people, that's the feeling that you actually want to find. Yeah. And I feel like there are helpers everywhere. I feel like I'm trying to remember if I remember the other half of the question.
Oh, just about how you find your own passion and you keep cultivating it. What does that mean for you? And maybe what your message is for this generation in doing so, or do you see that they're doing that? Do you see that there's passion in this generation coming up?
I feel like there's definitely passion. There's definitely passion in millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I feel like a lot of the information, especially when it comes to like environmental and stuff like that, we see how things have, progressed. We've seen how things have left, and we want to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of where my passion comes through, where I see these stories and I'm like, okay, what can I do? And I think that's what a lot of people end up asking themselves. And a lot of my passion just comes from, wanting to tell stories that I haven't seen or heard before. Like, my big thing is always about diversity, being able to tell diverse stories. Like, every story that I write, there's always like a cast of characters who come from all over, because that's how I grew up. Like, there was all of us, and all of us were different, and that's what I want to showcase in my own work. And I don't know, I have a lot of, I guess, hope for this new generation, because there's a lot of people in the new generation who sees how things are happening and aren't afraid to speak to that and to say, you can't really say that about someone, or we really should care about the environment more, or we're trying to, and there's a lot of like, especially new businesses and stuff that are trying to like make it easier to care about the environment, to like do what you need to. Like I feel like just myself, like I'm constantly like learning about something. I'm like, oh, okay, so we have a composting ordinance now. Okay, cool. How do I compost? Like, what can I put in there? Like, what's the best way to do this? Okay, break down all my boxes. Make sure I recycle everything. It's just I think it's the little things, and I think sometimes when we zoom in, we end up missing the big picture of all the stuff that people are trying to do to make the world a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. I mean, it's very exciting to hear that you're doing that, and you have such a great passion for it, and you're bringing in all these great people to speak. Do you feel like it's being received really well?
Yeah.
Are you happy with the progress it's taking? And
Yeah, I'm really happy with the progress. It's definitely new for me to try to like, I'm such an introvert.
Really?
So like reach out to people. I'm like, hey, I have a podcast. Please come on. Kind of thing. But it's great because like I'll bring someone on, and then they'll be like, this was a lot of fun. Like I really enjoyed talking about it. I was like, nobody really asked me about this. So like, and they're like, if there's anyone you want to like talk to that I know a connection, like let me know. And I'm like, okay, great, because so much easier than like cold emailing people. So like the last episode I did was with Mark Wright. He's the VP of film at Higher Ground for the Obamas. And the reason I was able to interview him is because I was his assistant on a feature film.
Oh, okay.
We did a film called They Cloned Tyrone together.
Okay.
That film was a whole experience for me because I had never worked on a set where just almost everybody looked like me. And I was just like, this is a completely different feeling.
What was that like?
It almost felt so easy because you didn't have to like switch or act a certain way. If I said a certain thing to someone, they'd be like, I got this. And like there's these moments because of the atmosphere in it, there's these moments where like, because like Jamie Foxx is in the film and he would come on to set and he had this boom bag backpack and he played this pimp in the movie. But like he would come in and he would just have this music blasting and everyone would just, and all of a sudden it would just be like everyone would turn up and it would be like dancing and we're like, I'm like
fun.
Like this whole atmosphere was just, it was great every time on set, and it's something I had never experienced before, and I was just like, this is really cool. So I definitely want to interview him because of that film, and then he also did another film for Higher Ground called Rustin. Which I had never heard of Rustin, and like his contributions to the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. eventually does that speech. I have a dream, and he's the main reason that march even happened, and that's a piece of history that I didn't know of, and that's something they push for Higher Ground, to tell his story, because he kind of got like pushed under the rug and a little bit forgotten. So it was really cool to see that. And Coleman Domingo is absolutely amazing in that film.
Wow.
Just amazing. So it was really great, like catching up with him and then talking about his current work and just, his passions and, why he pursues his work, because a lot of films and stuff that Higher Ground does, and the Macro, who did They Cloned Tyrone, they're very much about telling diverse films, telling diverse stories that you haven't seen before, that are centered around people of color, and yeah, it was a great experience working for them. Great experience talking to him and being able to bring him on the podcast and talk about those passions.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the biggest thing you've learned about yourself along this journey?
Being able to host.
Really? Yeah.
Because it was when I started the process, I didn't really I've created podcasts before, but I'm production. I deal with logistics
behind the scenes
with all that stuff. And then so I think when I did the first episode, I was like, wait, I have to do all this. I have to talk to them. I have to listen actively and remember what they said and be like, okay, now respond. Type of thing, but also not forget where I'm trying to go with this. So it was a whole learning curve, and then just the research of because I researched so many pages just to cut down certain certain questions, and then just knowing what questions to ask. So it was also a learning curve, just each episode of because the first 2 people I interviewed, we ended up talking for 2 hours, and I was like, wait, this is only supposed to be a 30 to 45 minute episode. And then I was like, okay, so narrow down the questions, narrow down what we're talking about, and then now I almost have it down to almost like a science. Yeah. So I always start off with introducing them, letting them tell their story, asking them questions about certain projects, and then it always ends with the same 5 rapid fire questions to kind of bring everything together for each and every episode. But yeah, it's been really great hearing everyone's story, everyone's journey, how they got into it, because like me as well, they hadn't heard of the term social impact entertainment. They were just they were just following a path, and they're like, oh, this works. Let's get into this. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. So you give it a title or a place. Yeah. Yeah. That's terrific. Well, it's very exciting. And I really appreciate you joining us today and telling us your story and bringing this all to our awareness. It's really helpful in terms of what we do and mental health and just across the board. It's really exciting to see someone so passionate about bringing this into the world and really staying with it, cultivating it, and making it happen. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
So June, if someone would like to get a hold of you or find out more about your work, how would they find you?
Yeah, so they can look up the podcast. It's called storyforgoodpod.com. The whole podcast is there, and you can contact me through the website. It goes straight to me. It doesn't go to anyone else, I promise. So easy to contact.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.